Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty intense stuff today. 1 Peter chapter 4.
Yeah, it's a powerful chapter for sure.
It really is. It gets right to the heart of what it means to live as a Christian, especially in a world that doesn't always, get it.
Right, exactly.
Or maybe even outright rejects those beliefs.
Yeah, it's definitely relevant for today, even though it was written so long ago.
Absolutely. So we're talking about suffering, perseverance, love, service to others.
Heavy stuff, but
That's deep.
there's also this incredible sense of hope woven through it all.
Yeah, and that's what struck me too, reading through it this time.
Yeah.
It's not just theoretical. It's surprisingly practical.
Yes, I completely agree.
So what were your initial thoughts going into this deep dive?
Well, what really stood out to me was just how honest Peter is, He doesn't sugarcoat the challenges that come with following Jesus.
Yeah, there's no holding back.
He uses some pretty vivid language, debauchery, drunkenness to paint this picture of the old life. Right. And then he just lays it out there, this call for radical transformation.
That's a good point. So let's talk about that transformation piece, because verses 1 through 4 really hammer home this idea of a shift.
Yeah.
A shift in how we think and how we act.
Absolutely. It's not just about believing in your head, but actually letting that belief transform how you live, how you interact with the world.
Okay, so it's putting faith into action.
Exactly. It's almost like Peter's saying, look, you've been given this brand new identity in Christ, so now let your actions reflect that.
Right. But that's got to be easier said than done, right? I mean, even when we know something's good for us, change is hard.
Oh, for sure. Change is never easy. And Peter actually acknowledges that.
He does.
Yeah, he's not naive to the struggles we face. The whole point is that this transformation, it's not a one-time thing, It's an ongoing process.
It's a journey.
It is. It's about spiritual growth, and yeah, there are going to be bumps along the way.
There are always bumps.
Always, yeah.
And speaking of bumps, the chapter goes on to talk about love and service, verses 7 through 11 specifically.
Oh, yeah, such an important part of the Christian life.
It is. And I'm curious about this phrase, fervent love, that Peter uses.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually look like in practice? How do we live that out?
That's a great question. It's a love that's, it's active, it's intense, but it's also incredibly forgiving.
Okay, so it's not just a feeling?
No, definitely not.
It's got some action behind it.
Absolutely. And there's this phrase he uses, cover a multitude of sins. I find that really powerful.
It is powerful.
It's about, choosing to see the best in others, to extend grace even when it's difficult.
That's beautiful, but I wonder how attainable that really is in our, messy, imperfect world.
Right.
I mean, how do we cover sins without just, sweeping problems under the rug?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not about ignoring wrongdoing.
Okay.
But it's about choosing to respond with love and forgiveness instead of judgment, It's about recognizing that we all mess up. We all need grace.
So it's more about restoration rather than punishment.
Exactly. And that ties right into the idea of service that Peter talks about.
Okay.
He calls us to use our gifts, whatever those may be, to serve one another without grumbling, without complaining. It's about putting the needs of others before our own.
Okay, so we've got this transformation, this active love.
Mm-hmm.
And then Peter doesn't shy away from a topic no one can really avoid suffering.
Yeah, that's right. Verses 12 through 19, it's all about facing trials and how we respond to them.
What's so interesting is that he doesn't just say, endure it or grin and bear it.
Right.
He actually encourages Christians to rejoice in their suffering.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most challenging parts of this chapter.
It's a hard concept to wrap your head around, for sure. I mean, I get that he connected to future glory.
Yeah.
But how can we find joy in the midst of real pain,
It's not about finding joy in the pain itself, but rather in the opportunity to share in Christ's suffering. And through that, to grow closer to him. It's about finding meaning and purpose even in difficult circumstances.
So it's about perspective, about seeing the bigger picture.
Yes, and trusting in God's plan even when we don't understand it. But Peter's also very clear that this rejoicing, this joy, it only applies to suffering for righteousness' sake.
Right, not just any kind of suffering.
Exactly. He specifically says, let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief.
It's a reminder that suffering itself isn't inherently good or bad.
Right.
It's the context that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember the historical context here. Peter was writing to Christians who were facing real persecution for their faith.
Mm.
He was reminding them that suffering for Christ, it's not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Yep.
It's actually honorable, even glorious.
There's a sense of encouragement in that, like solidarity, We're not alone in this.
Exactly.
And then Peter brings up this theme of judgment, which pops up in verse 5 and again in verses 17 through 18.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that God is ultimately just.
And our actions, they have consequences. But it's not about instilling fear. It's more about urging us to live in a way that honors God, that reflects His will.
So it's a call to accountability.
Yes.
Both for ourselves and maybe for others.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all accountable to God. We should live in a way that reflects that.
Wow. There's just so much to unpack in this chapter.
I know, it's a lot.
We've covered this call to a transformed life, the importance of love, service, the challenge of finding meaning in suffering, the reality of judgment.
And the hope that runs through it all.
Yes, absolutely. So, as we wrap up, what stands out to you the most from this deep dive into 1 Peter chapter 4?
For me, it's that reminder that even in a world that feels sometimes hostile to our faith, we have this anchor in Christ. We can find strength and purpose in Him, even when things are tough, even when we're struggling. That's a powerful thought. And as we leave this conversation, here's a final thought for all of you listening. If suffering is indeed a part of the Christian experience, how can we best support and encourage each other through those difficult times? Let that question guide you as you continue to explore this incredible chapter.
I think that's a great question to ponder.
Yeah, I do too.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's been a great discussion.
Yeah, it has.
And all of you listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.